What do you think the president's answer is going to be about participating in those hearings on Monday?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of that announcement, of course, but up until this point, we've seen this is illegitimate. It's a sham. It doesn't hurt Donald Trump that the Democrats are going down this fake impeachment road. It hurts the American people. You know, when Nancy Pelosi stepped to the podium yesterday, she could have talked about USMCA and passing it for our farmers and ranchers and auto workers. She could have talked about fixing our infrastructure that is so badly in need of repair, or lowering prescription drug costs. She didn't. I have to make a point, though, about Nancy Pelosi. I think this is key. You saw today, you saw yesterday that Nancy Pelosi pointed out she was moving forward with impeachment before we even responded to Chairman Nadler's letter. She did the same thing earlier when she said move forward with impeachment before we even released the transcript with Zelensky. And who could forget, we're going to pass Obamacare before we know what's in it. This is a pattern of hers. She doesn't need proof. She doesn't need evidence. All she wants is a political power grab to try and take back power that she lost because of her bad decisions.
Okay, I want to ask you how confident you are in Republicans. Here's what Senator Chris Coons had to say.
We will be relying on a small number of Republicans who are pushing back against this idea and who recognize that impeachment is a serious, significant constitutional moment. There are, I believe, a few Republicans who recognize that what President Trump did here was demonstrably impeachable, but who are very concerned about the political consequences for them and their party.
Hogan, is that true? Are there a few Republicans who think that what the president did is demonstrably impeachable?
Well, we've already had a vote on it in the House, and in lockstep, the Republicans stood together, which they never do.
What about the Senate?
Because of what this president, the evidence that he's done nothing wrong. I mean, that's pretty clear at this point. The Senate, as I mentioned before, the president is clear. If it goes there, he wants a trial. He welcomes it. He wants the American people to see the truth.
But are there Republican senators who are wavering?
He absolutely wants to bring forward serious witnesses like the whistleblower, like Adam Schiff, like Hunter and Joe Biden. If they're going to do this, if the Democrats want this fight, it's something the president is willing to have.
This is the White House's Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley giving the closest thing that we've had to a press briefing in 270 days. To be clear, the actual press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, whose official duties seem to be tweeting, gets paid $179,000 a year in taxpayer dollars. So if you like Twitter, congratulations, you've now fulfilled the sole qualification to be the next White House press secretary. Gidley starts off by complaining that Pelosi isn't taking up the USMCA, and to that I can only say that it must be really frustrating when a bill is ready to be passed and yet nothing happens. Almost like how more than 250 bills have passed the House, but Republicans in the Senate refuse to take any of them up. I guess if Nancy Pelosi simply bragged about how she was the Grim Reaper, the White House would have no choice but to let it slide, just like they do for McConnell. I mean, Gidley literally complains that Nancy Pelosi spent time on her press conference talking about impeachment as opposed to infrastructure or lowering prescription drug prices. First of all, she spoke about impeachment because the press conference was about impeachment. I'm not out here claiming to speak for Nancy Pelosi, but that might be why she didn't bring up arbitrary bills at her press conference. And second of all, if the White House was actually concerned about infrastructure or lowering prescription drug costs like Gidley says, they would recognize that Democrats in the House already introduced legislation addressing both issues. H.R. 1428, the Transportation Infrastructure for Jobs Creation Act, appropriates funding for infrastructure projects, and H.R. 987, the Strengthening Healthcare and Lowering Prescription Drug Costs Act, passed the House in May and has been languishing in the Senate ever since. It's almost like this isn't actually about infrastructure or lowering drug costs. Now, once Gidley is finished pretending that we're not allowed to conduct oversight on the president for committing crimes because we have to pass the USMCA instead, he tries to criticize Pelosi for moving forward with impeachment before the White House responded to Nadler's letter, just like she did when she opted to move forward before Trump released the transcript with Zelensky. But here's the thing. She moved forward with impeachment because of the very reason that the White House was failing to respond and was purposefully dragging their feet. It was those very acts of obstruction that formed the basis of yet more articles of impeachment. So of course Democrats moved forward with impeachment after Trump obstructed, considering that is partially why he's being impeached. But far and away the most insane claim by Gidley is that Trump welcomes an impeachment trial so long as certain conditions are being met, such as the testimonies of the whistleblower, Adam Schiff, and Hunter and Joe Biden. Now, I should mention right off the bat that making his official actions dependent on ridiculous conditions being met is probably not the optics the White House is looking for right now. But beyond that, you could not find a more absurd false equivalency than conditioning Trump's involvement in his own impeachment for trying to bribe a foreign country into doing his political bidding with calling completely unrelated witnesses for made-up accusations that have nothing to do with Trump's actions. The whistleblower's identity is utterly irrelevant considering everything in the whistleblower's complaint has already been proven true, most of it by Trump's own admission. That's like if a guy was caught in the act robbing a bank, but before he stands trial, he demands that the arresting police officer also testify to find out whether he's a Democrat or Republican first. Make sense? Yeah, I didn't think so. Republicans are desperate to frame Adam Schiff as the newest boogeyman in all of this, claiming that how he ran the Intel Committee hearings was unfair. Only he was following rules passed by Republicans in 2015 and signed by then Republican Speaker John Boehner. So if the GOP has major qualms about fairness, guess who they have to blame? And finally, of course, what would the GOP's defense be if not some desperate whataboutism with Hunter and Joe Biden? So Trump can claim that he was simply being the anti-corruption crusader that we supposedly all know he is, and that he was trying to root out corruption, but the guy didn't even care if the investigation went forward. All he actually wanted was the announcement of a probe into Biden to hurt him politically.
But he had to get those two investigations if that official act was going to take place, correct?
He had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it.
The fact is, if the White House was looking for some legitimate witnesses, they might want to consider allowing Mulvaney to testify, or Pompeo, or Giuliani, or Nunes, or Bolton, or Pence, all of whom were implicated and aware of Trump's criminal behavior as it was being carried out. As Gordon Sondland testified under oath, everyone was in the loop.
Within my State Department emails, there is a July 19th email. This email was sent to Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Perry, Brian McCormick, who is Secretary Perry's chief of staff at the time, Miss Kenna, who is the executive secretariat for Secretary Pompeo, Chief of Staff Mulvaney, and Mr. Mulvaney's senior advisor, Rob Blair. A lot of senior officials. Here is my exact quote from that email. I talked to Zelensky just now. He is prepared to receive POTUS's call. We'll assure him that he intends to run a fully transparent investigation and will turn over every stone. He would greatly appreciate a call prior to Sunday so that he can put out some media about a friendly and productive call, no details, prior to Ukraine election on Sunday. Chief of Staff Mulvaney responded, I asked the NSC to set it up for tomorrow. Everyone was in the loop.
But the simple truth is that as long as the White House can help it, none of these people will testify, and the Trump administration will continue to tack on inane conditionalities for their own participation. Of course, they do this at their own peril, because if the entire world can agree on one thing, it's that innocent people typically want to defend themselves, which explains exactly why Trump and his accomplices are nowhere to be found.